A month ago, you said that you were, quote, bullish, that there's going to be a heck of a lot of traffic moving through every single day, unquote, and that you expect that this will, quote, cruise to normalcy sometime really, really soon, unquote. No, that is not the case right now, and Iran most recently has delivered this set of demands that must be met to open the strait, and that set of demands includes the lifting of the naval blockade and sanctions, war reparations, the release of frozen Iranian assets, an end to attacks on Iran's allies. So I guess I just don't know when really, really soon is.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So Kevin Hassett went on CNN with Jake Tapper, and Jake showed up with a folder full of things Kevin has said before. Kevin is the White House's top economic advisor, which means defending the numbers is the job. The disagreement is simple. Kevin says the economy is strong and prices are coming under control. Jake says the record and people's own bills tell a different story. Neither one gives an inch, and it stays polite the entire time, which somehow makes it worse. Stick around for the last stretch, because Jake saves his sharpest question for the end. Quick one for the comments before we start. Do you think tariffs end up costing regular shoppers or not? One line is fine. And drop your country down there while you're at it. I like seeing how far these reach. All right, let's get into it.
Let us start, obviously, with the latest jobs numbers. The economy, according to BLS, lost 23,000 jobs in July, when economists were expecting a 95,000 job gain. The job creation you boasted about for the previous 2 months, unfortunately, those numbers were also sharply revised down. It turns out 100,000 jobs were not created in May and June. You said in June that this was, quote, the strongest job market in your lifetime. By what metric?
Yeah, I think that one of the things we're seeing is that these jobs numbers are getting revised left and right. You can remember over the last couple of years, there were millions of revisions. And the bottom line is that if you look at the overall economy, then things are really, really booming. As an example, there are 83,000 construction workers building factories right now. That's a number that we've never seen before. Initial claims for unemployment insurance are the lowest they've been since World War II. There are more job openings than there are unemployed workers. So there are all these things that suggested the numbers should have been really strong. And when it didn't come out strong, we sort of dug in and we saw that the two things that made it negative, one of them was a reduction in government workers, and it was mostly teachers at states, taking July off. And the other thing was that the FIFA ended, and so that we had a whole bunch of hospitality workers, file for unemployment in July. And so anyway, so you take those two out and you get back to what the consensus number was, about 100,000 job creation. And the point is, if that were in isolation, I wouldn't be caring about like throwing this or that on the side because it's a special story. But the fact is, everything else is so strong that I think that it makes sense that the consensus was about right.
Well, we can look at 1 month here or there, but let's take a look at the overall jobs record under President Trump. Yeah. There have been job losses for 6 out of the 18 full months of President Trump's second term. That's a third of them. And the Trump administration has only added 548,000 net jobs so far, which is considered very slow growth. It's growth, but very slow. 2 million jobs were created in the last 18 months of Biden's presidency. Are you really arguing that your numbers are better than that?
Well, I disagree with your number. We'll have to follow up on email, but I just looked at the latest number. It was that job creation under President Trump since January 20th is about 880,000 jobs. But we won't argue about 800 or 500, factually on a show right now. But the fact is that the thing that really jumps out at us is that those are really good jobs. They're manufacturing jobs. They're construction jobs. The number of manufacturing jobs under Joe Biden dropped by 230,000. And the reason that matters is the intuition that, candidates of both parties understand that these blue-collar jobs in construction and manufacturing, they're really high-paying jobs. And so the typical construction or manufacturing worker in the U.S. has seen an increase under President Trump of $3,000 or $4,000 to salary. And under Joe Biden, it was about negative that. It dropped about $3,000. And the reason is that manufacturing was collapsing, and so the high-paying jobs were going away. And so I think that we'll take our record over his every day.
Well, you're talking about manufacturing jobs. I'm talking about the overall job market. Even if we go with your number, okay, which I think incorporates January 2025, when President Trump was inaugurated on January 20th, and I'm not going to bicker on that.
That's not bicker, yeah.
Yeah, it's 800,000, according to you, versus 2 million under Biden. And I think the issue is that there are two things right now that the economists say are weighing on the economy. Both of them are specifically Trump policies. One is obviously the Iran war, which has led to high gas prices. The president said that war would take 4 to 6 weeks. We're now in month 6. And the second policy that's having an impact is tariffs, which, according to a recent report by the Fed, those tariffs were passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. So it does seem as though the president's policies have led to this economic situation where the job growth is slower than in the last 18 months of Biden's administration.
Right.
The economy lost jobs in a month when forecasters were expecting close to 100,000 new ones. And the very first move from Kevin Hassett is to tell you the data itself is unreliable. You have to understand how convenient that is. When the numbers land well, they get printed on graphics and repeated for weeks. When they come in ugly, suddenly the agency producing them is sloppy and revision happy. You do not get to have it both ways. And here's what got me. Kevin said this: if you look at the overall economy, then things are really, really booming. Booming. That one word is carrying an enormous amount of weight for a month that went backward. He points to construction workers building factories. He points to unemployment claims. He points to job opening. Every single indicator except the one he was actually asked about. Then comes the accounting move, and honestly, this is the part that made me sit up. Kevin said this: so you take those two out and you get back to what the consensus number was, about 100,000 job creation. Take those two out. Teachers off for July, hospitality workers after a tournament wrapped up. Remove them, and the bad month magically becomes an average month. That is grading your own exam and crossing off the questions you missed before you count the score. Every economy has a weak category in a weak month. You don't get to delete it and call the leftovers the result. But the moment that told me everything was the number fight. Jake Tapper lays out the whole record. Job losses in a third of the month so far, a net total that is a fraction of the previous stretch, and asks a direct question about it. And Kevin said this: well, I disagree with your number. We'll have to follow up on email. Follow up on email. You are the top economic voice in that building, sitting on national television, and your answer on the central number of your own record is let's take this offline. If his figure were the strong one, he would have hit it like a drum right there. Instead, he swings over to manufacturing, because manufacturing is the one line on the page he liked. Jake catches it in real time. Jake said this: well, you're talking about manufacturing jobs. I'm talking about the overall job market. That single sentence is the entire interview. And here's something worth knowing. In 1929, Irving Fisher, probably the most celebrated economist in America at the time, announced publicly that stock prices had reached what he called a permanently high plateau. Days later, the market crashed, and he lost most of his own fortune. Credentials and confidence have never once been evidence. The paycheck data is the evidence.
Well, let's unpack these things. First of all, if you look at the latest inflation numbers, right, the consumer price index was negative for the month of June. Core was 0. That's the thing that the Fed cares about. The PCE index, which is the Fed's #1 index, was negative both for core and top line. And so all of the price data have been decelerating. Now, there was a big inflation in the previous administration, but there's been rapid deceleration of inflation under President Trump. And so if you're going to tell a story that tariffs are causing some kind of positive shock to inflation, then you got to come up with some counterfactual that explains why it is that right now inflation is running at about 0. And so I don't think that's an issue. And I think that, again, going forward, if you look at imports, so the trade policy has made everybody want to onshore their stuff. If you look at imports right now, 50% of imports in the U.S. are capital goods, which are going into those factories that are being built by the 80-something thousand construction workers in the factories. And so that's a very, very successful trade policy because it's creating jobs that we'll see in the second half of the year when the lights go on in those factories.
It's not me that's saying that those higher tariffs that those costs were passed on to consumers. It's the Fed in a recent report that I'm sure you've read. But let's talk about gas prices. They're high because the Strait of Hormuz is still closed. Because of the war in Iran and Iran taking the Strait hostage. A month ago, you said that you were, quote, bullish, that there's going to be a heck of a lot of traffic moving through every single day, unquote, and that you expect that this will, quote, cruise to normalcy sometime really, really soon, unquote. No, that is not the case right now. And Iran, most recently, has delivered this set of demands that must be met to open the Strait. And that set of demands includes the lifting of the naval blockade and sanctions, war reparations, the release of frozen Iranian assets, an end to attacks on Iran's allies. So I guess I just don't know when really, really soon is.
Well, it's happening already, Jake. And first of all, I don't negotiate with the Iranians, and I don't think I'd be very good at it. But the fact is that right in the peak of the conflict early on, you saw that oil prices were going way north of $100 a barrel. Right now, they were like high 70s late in the week. I think they're running about 80 over the weekend. And so the reason oil prices have come down is that our excellent U.S. Navy has been escorting ships out of the Gulf. But also, we've taken a whole number of steps, including increasing production in the U.S., waiving the Jones Act, so that right now 100 million barrels of Gulf of America produced oil are now shipped into the East and West Coast because we waived the Jones Act. That's put downward pressure on prices. Now, prices are still higher than we would like, but we've taken a lot of steps so that when the Gulf situation is resolved, then we can expect prices to go way, way down because of all these new measures that we've taken.
Watch the tariff pivot because it is genuinely slick. Kevin said this: "You gotta come up with some counterfactual that explains why it is that right now inflation is running at about zero. Do you see the swap?" He was asked whether tariffs raised prices on shoppers. He answered with the total inflation rate. Those are two different questions. A tax on imported goods can push up the price of the things it touches, while other prices soften and pull the average back down. The average conceals it. That is what averages do. And Jake does not let him build a straw man out of it. Jake said this: "It's not me that's saying that those higher tariffs. It's the Fed in a recent report that I'm sure you've read. For anyone who missed the reference, that means the central bank's own researchers, the same institution Kevin cited seconds earlier as the authority whose price gauge really counts. He wants their inflation number on his side and their tariff finding out of the room. Pick one." Then the conversation moves to gas. And this is where my patience runs out with the framing. People are paying more at the pump because a shipping lane is still shut down over a war. That war was sold to the public as a 4 to 6 week job. We are now in month 6. Nobody has said out loud what the finish line looks like or how anybody gets out of it. And in the meantime, the bill is landing on drivers who had no say in any of it. That is not an abstraction. That is a father filling a tank on the way to a shift he can't afford to miss. So when Jake reads Kevin his own forecast back to him, the closing line is devastating precisely because it is calm. Jake said this: "So I guess I just don't know when really, really soon is." Those are his own words coming back at him. And the response: Kevin said this: "Well, it's happening already, Jake. Happening already. The lane is closed. The list of demands for reopening it is sitting on a table somewhere. Nothing about that is happening already. Let me give you the history here, because we have watched this exact movie. In 1973, an oil embargo hit the United States, and the price of crude roughly quadrupled inside a few months. Americans queued around the block for fuel. Officials kept promising a quick resolution. That disruption ran about half a year, and the price damage lingered for years after supply came back. Energy shocks tied to conflict have never once resolved on the schedule of the person making the promise."
I know you don't negotiate with the Iranians, but you do talk about the economy, and you said you're bullish there's going to be a heck of a lot of traffic moving through every single day.
Right, like if there
I wouldn't call it a heck of a lot. It's not a heck of a lot, though.
The price went down about 50%, so that's kind of impressive.
The numbers released on Friday show that wage growth is not keeping up with inflation. Average hourly earnings barely rose from June. Inflation is at 3.5%. That's above the central bank's target of 2%. A CNN poll a few months ago found that 61% of Americans have said that they had to cut back on groceries. Is that not a problem?
Well, it sure is a problem. Grocery prices are way too high. It started out when we basically printed money and helicopter dropped into the U.S. and created a 20% inflation. In the past, I go to the grocery store, I do the shopping, and I keep an eye on prices every week, and there's stuff like the price of beef that's still really, really high and very problematic for people. The thing is that you mentioned the 1 month number, that if you aggregate over the Trump term, that again, the typical overall worker is making $1,000 more after adjusting for inflation, and $3,000 or $4,000 more if they're in a blue-collar job. And so those people have more money for groceries, but grocery prices are still high, and we've still got a lot of work to do. Now, one of the things that we've been doing is that we've been taking steps to address these issues. So we started out with avian flu, and everybody was talking about egg prices. Egg prices are really low right now. And we just have this massive effort by Brooke Rollins to address this pest that's coming in and made it so we had to shut the border to Mexico so that the pest wouldn't spread all over the U.S. And we just reopened the border for Mexico. So there should be good news on beef prices right around the corner.
How do you square you saying just now we still have a lot of work to do with you saying that we are living in the greatest economy in your lifetime?
Right. Well, okay, so people are losing their jobs at the lowest level since World War II. Losing your job is a really bad thing to happen to somebody. And the labor force is way bigger than it was back then, so that's a remarkable piece of data. Keynes argued that the business cycle is being driven by investment fluctuations. We've got capital investment in the U.S. about the highest I've ever seen. And so we've got all the cyclical things that we normally look at saying that this is an economy that's in liftoff stage. And so, yeah, I stand by it.
And then Jake refuses to let the prediction slide, which is why this stretch is worth watching twice. Jake said this: "I wouldn't call it a heck of a lot. It's not a heck of a lot though. No theatrics, no raised voice. Just a man being held to a sentence he chose to say out loud a month ago." And notice the escape hatch Kevin reaches for. He starts talking about the price coming down about 50%, as though that settles it. But the price came down from a panic spike that the conflict itself created. Prices exploded, then partly unexploded, and now the partial unexploding is being presented as an achievement. If I set your kitchen on fire and then put half of it out, I don't get to bill you for the rescue, then groceries, and give the man this much. He doesn't pretend. Kevin said this: "Well, it sure is a problem. Grocery prices are way too high." He talks about doing his own shopping, watching the price of beef, knowing it's hurting people. I actually believe him on that. He isn't stupid, and he isn't blind. But look at what he does with that honesty. He immediately reaches for the aggregate. The typical worker making roughly $1,000 more. The blue-collar worker making a few thousand more. And here's what people don't realize about aggregates. Nobody experiences one. Nobody stands at the register and pays the national average. A raise that gets eaten by beef and rent and insurance is not a raise you can feel. And when someone tells a family that they are statistically better off while their cart holds less than it did last year, that family doesn't hear economics. They hear that nobody is listening. And then Kevin says the quiet part. Kevin said this: "We still got a lot of work to do." That sentence is true. It's also the most honest thing said in the whole conversation, which is exactly why Jake pounces. Jake said this: "How do you square you saying just now we still have a lot of work to do with you saying that we are living in the greatest economy in your lifetime?" There's no squaring it, and you can hear it in the pause before the answer, in the reach for a claimed statistic from the World War II era, in the reach for a long-dead economist to explain investment cycles. When someone answers a simple contradiction with a lecture, the lecture is the tell. He never reconciles the two statements because they cannot be reconciled. He just plants his feet and says he stands by it. And that's what bothers me most about this entire interview. Not one factual claim on its own. I can argue with numbers all day. It's the posture. It's a man who genuinely knows the beef aisle is brutal, who genuinely knows the shipping lane is still shut, who genuinely knows the monthly report came in negative, and who has decided that his job is to describe a country that people are not currently living in. That gap between the podium and the checkout line is how administrations lose the public, not through one bad month, through being told month after month that the thing they are experiencing isn't happening. The data will keep printing either way. It doesn't care who is standing at the microphone. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.